Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Imani. Imani, welcome to the show.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Delighted. We had one of your colleagues, Matthew, on before Christmas from the home, and it was just like he struck me as a real inspirational character. We only have great people on the show. We only people come from great passion, and yet his take really stretched me, and in a good way. And I was like, wow, this, I love learning from people who are ahead of me, and so that was great. He's a great guy.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. So you're the home's VP, Vice President of Behavioural Health and Outpatient Services. So this is the home for little wanderers.
Yes.
And can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself? Imani?
Sure. So my name is Imani Seunarine. I am a licensed mental health counselor in Massachusetts in the United States. And I work at the Home for Little Wanderers, which is the United States' oldest child welfare organization. And we serve 15,000 kids annually and their families, all to the mission to help vulnerable children and their families build permanent and positive change. In my work, I support a wonderful and tremendous group of clinicians, providers who are working in schools, they're working in family homes, in the community, in our clinic, and we are supporting kids and families with where they're at in this moment in the ways that they want to be supported with their mental health needs. I'm also a mom to a newly minted 12-year-old. So I am like your listeners, I am along for the journey that parenting brings.
Yeah. So yeah, it's fascinating. Matthew was telling me last time that the home was founded in the 19th century, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm. 1799.
So yeah, no. So it's the 18th century.
18th, yeah.
18th century. I'm out. Yeah, 1799, and wow, it's incredible, isn't it? We think about flexibility and going with the changes. So 1799. That's like that. We don't hear many references to stuff that long ago in adoption and children's welfare and stuff. So a huge heritage. So today we're going to be talking. You mentioned mental health. So today we're going to be talking about how parents can understand and identify when their children are struggling, how to get them help, and what parents can do to help and support their kids. So maybe if we could start with what because mental health means different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
I love this question. And the reason I love this question is because I think so often mental health is presented as something that is so separate from medical health. And in my mind and in my experience, you cannot have one without the other. We are whole beings, we have mind and body, and they are intrinsically connected. And so when people are experiencing difficulties in their mental health, whether that's caused by a physical ailment or some kind of situational event or longstanding chronic stress or trauma, we will then see an impact on mental health. And that can look like many different things for each person. And yes, in my industry, we have a diagnostic statistical manual that says, hey, there's a group of symptoms and this is what we're going to call it. But as humans, we experience a myriad of emotions, and our mental health and our physical health and sort of that interdependence on each other, it will manifest in lots of different ways. And so it's understanding that what I may call overwhelm, someone else may call depression. And either way, regardless of what you're calling it, it's having an impact. And when mental health really kind of moves into a direction where it's negatively impacting someone, whether that's physically, emotionally, their relationships, that's when we're really encouraging people to get support and help.
Yeah. Traditionally, it's called mental health, but traditionally it's been the study of mental disease, though, right?
Yes, and mental illness. Yep.
And
it's always and it's been discussed and viewed with a tremendous amount of stigma. And I would be remiss to say that there isn't still stigma today. There is still such a far distance that we need to go as a community of people to say this is actually part of the human experience, and it's not, oh, this is only happening to this person in isolation, and that we don't all have some level of contribution to it, to either to what the actual manifestation of the disease is, and or how to help that person in their recovery.
So the word that we said when I described the kind of the framework for the conversation was the word struggling. How parents can see when they're struggling. And as you were talking just then, Imani, what I was thinking was actually a friend of mine who I thought was struggling, and who I asked him, I said, look, haven't been quite, I did it on a text, right? Because it's one of those, just let it, because of stigma. I don't know whether there's more to it than stigma. I put on and said, I said, you haven't been yourself recently. If you ever want to chat, right? So I was laying out for the future. Just let me know. And clearly, sorry, listeners and Imani, I'm not a clinician, right? I'm just a guy who would be there to help his mate. And he straight went straight back saying, no, I'm fine, right? So there's that is kind of a default stiff upper lip Brit thing to do, right? And I, like, no, fine. Everybody just fine. And me and my wife haven't got any kids, but I know from speaking to adoptive, having parents as friends, and having spoken to a lot of adoptive parents, that the kids sometimes say that as well. So we think they're struggling, and they're like, no, right? So that's a real challenge, right? If you talked about the difference between overwhelming and depression. So it was, I think what you said was what you might class, or what one person might class as overwhelm, somebody else might call depression, and that's so we've got different. We've got different definitions. We've got different ways of seeing this stuff, and obviously we've got these different stuff. So in terms of when we think our kids are struggling, and their barriers go up, so so I'm hesitating, because the natural thing to go to as a left brain action man like me, right, would be to say, okay, so how do we solve that?
Right.
And people are always looking to the how-tos, aren't they? People are always looking to the how-tos, and I know it's not as simple as that. So maybe you could talk to that. I don't want to try and pin you down to 5 different steps to do that, because if all that 5 different steps too worked, right, we wouldn't have the challenges with mental health that we do.
Correct. Right.
All that, clickbait and personal development strategies that is used to lure us in and pretend things are simpler.
Right.
It doesn't work. If it works, then we wouldn't be in the state that we're in.
Absolutely. Now, so I guess I would start with, I love that you recognized that something was happening for your friend, and you opened the door and just said, I'm here. right? Like you're letting that person know that you're there. And yes, I love that you said, that's like a very British, like the response that you got was like a very British response. I would say that like, I think very often it's a universal response. I see that here in the States all the time. I certainly have been the person who's like, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. Good. Don't need anything. I think that in so many ways is because we are very conditioned to be okay. We're, to put on the facade that we're okay. I think about even, when we say hello to someone, how are you? At least here in the States and particularly in the Northeast, people are asking that question as they are leaving. We're not conditioned to stop and actually hear, how are you actually doing? And taking the time to be in that space. And so if you're constantly conditioned that way, that is the response you're going to give. I'm okay. I'm going to move it along because I don't want to continue to have this conversation. It's uncomfortable. It creates distress. And I think for parents, what we can do is continue to create circumstances where we are always leaving doors open, windows open, anything open, so that our children know that when they are ready, we are going to be there to listen. And that is the biggest thing, to listen, because, very often it's, I'm going to solve it. I'm going to make this better for my child. Don't want them to be in distress. But distress is part of our condition. We have to learn how to manage that stress. We have to learn how to have the skills to think through, how do I problem solve? That doesn't just magically happen. We have to practice that. And so as parents, if our child seems off, whatever that may be for your child, right? So I know for my child, if he's maybe not eating as much, or if his sleep seems, distressed, or if I notice that the things that maybe he's usually really into, all of a sudden he's creating some distance between himself, whether it's with friends or just activities, those are indications to me something might be off. And I need to ask about that, or at least create the circumstances to let him know I'm open to talk about this when you're ready. Now, obviously, there are more extreme, symptoms that will present. And that's certainly when we start looking at diagnostics, right? And it's clear you need like very concrete intervention and help. But just the mere act of making it very clear, I'm asking how you're doing, and I'm going to listen to find out when you're ready to talk about it, is such a critical and I think undervalued step that people generally don't take.
Yeah. When it comes to tough emotions and kids, although, as I said, me and my wife haven't got any kids, I have done an awful lot of work in elementary schools, what we would call primary schools here in the UK, mm-hmm. Talking to kids about emotions. And one of the areas that we looked at was bullying, and mm-hmm. and I found myself on one occasion, I had an idea of sharing a story about me being bullied. So I don't know, the idea came to me in the moment.
Sure.
And it really seemed to open the kids up, because it struck me that they weren't really used to somebody, I mean, I was kind of an authority figure, as in I was a grown-up walking into their classroom.
Yeah.
But I had this very loud shirt on, unlike the shirt I've got today. So they could clearly see I wasn't all buttoned up in a suit, right? They could see, and because of the stuff that we did, the games that we played, they could see that I wasn't some sort of serious guy. But they really seemed to, open the door, me expressing my stuff.
Yeah.
How I had felt on being bullied by this guy when I was a kid. That really seemed to open them up. And one of the questions that fascinates me, I always ask if we get anywhere around this, if I'm talking to a parent, is to what extent does the idea of us modeling the behavior that we want to see in our kids. And in this case, I'm talking about us opening up to our kids about our own adoptions. And surely, to me, it's a no-brainer that will, if we lead, the leader has to go first. We're leading our kids. We've got to lead, we've got to go first. And that means going to express our, the stuff that we felt when we were their age, or the stuff that we're experiencing now. I'm over-egging this, but you know where I'm going on this.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you. Simon, like, I think that is such an important value that parents and people who hold place in children's lives, if they understood that more and understood that there's so much power there, I think that could be so healing for kids. And I think about, yes, you need to make sure that you are sharing information that is appropriate and, for where they're at developmentally, and creating safety and structure as you're doing that. But the experience for a child to know you're not alone in this, that you're modeling, I am somebody who has gotten through this and you can as well. And helping them understand and validate that what is happening for them in this moment is true, is real, you believe them, and you understand what it's like to sit in that muck and mire. And I think that so often as societies, we have this idea of, well, we're the adults, we know best, you're just going to do, and the kids just sort of have to fall in line. And if they don't, then they're disruptive, or they're they get all sorts of pejorative language. But they're not just these like robots. They have their own feelings, they have their own thoughts. To engage them in that way is helping them practice that and helping them understand I'm not alone. And that so much healing happens in that. The fact that you had those children, starting to share that is proof of that.
Yeah. The thing that came to me as you were saying that was, was how I've seen gifted communicators, adoptive parents who are gifted communicators, and one of the things that they do when they're talking to other adoptive parents is they normalize what the speaker normalizes what the audience is feeling. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because if an adoptive parent who is listening has been through that experience, and I'm thinking about some guys a little bit further to the south of you. There's an organization called Mike and Kristen run the Honestly Adoption company, who are down in Indiana, and they've got a huge family. They've got a podcast. They've got a huge family, and through adoption and adoption from foster care, and they've learned an awful lot. And they share what they've learned, right? But what they do is they say, look, we understand where you're at, and that kind of that empathy is the empathy that they create with their audience is the same. It's the same thing. That I've been there first. I've been there too. I've felt badly on the back of stuff. Yeah. It's the to me it's the essential building block. That empathy is the essential building block of all our relationships.
I would agree. As you're talking about this, it's making me think of, we have here in Massachusetts, we have a professional identity and a professional role called a family partner. And these are individuals who we hire because they have the lived experience of being a parent or a caregiver to a child who has had a mental health challenge, and all the ways and all the systems that they've had to navigate so that their family can thrive. And one of the things I love about what family partners do in their work when they're meeting with a parent or a caregiver is exactly what you're describing. They are attuned to empathy. They are normalizing and validating all of the things that feel hard and all of the things that may even feel unspeakable. And they will say, yes, today your child received a diagnosis and maybe you're grieving. And I'm going to tell you, it's okay to grieve. That's like earth shattering and groundbreaking work, because we are often sort of made to feel like, oh, you're a parent, you're supposed to figure this out. You're supposed to know it all. And if you don't, or if you move in a direction that somebody may not be in agreement with, it's seen as a value of failure on your parenting. But to have another parent say, yes, this is really hard stuff, and you'll be okay, you'll survive this, but it feels hard right now, and it's okay, you can have all your feelings, and I'll be right here with you.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You mentioned the grief word. It's I heard something really useful on this a couple of weeks ago, and it was, we're back to the start. How are you? I'm fine. That sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is, dismiss the fact that we're feeling rubbish, right? I almost swore then. This is a family show, that's all. Which as adults, most of the time, most of us are trying to change the way that we feel, right? A lot of and numbing, social media, shopping, drinking, smoking, whatever it is. Yeah. So we're trying to change the way I feel, or playing ninja mind tricks on ourselves, which they don't tend to work from my experience.
Agreed.
So, but grief is a funny one in the fact that it's one of the ones that we seem to try to change less. Do you see what I mean? Like, if somebody said, well, there's that Kubler-Ross curve, isn't there? The Kubler-Ross, it's like denial.
Yes,
denial,
the stages of grief. Yeah,
stages of grief. Right? So there is a denial stage that starts off, if I can remember right. But it's one of those occasions that we don't try and change stuff. We don't try and change stuff. We don't get angry. We might get angry ourselves about getting frustrated at our kids, for example.
Sure.
But we don't get angry with ourselves that we're still grieving the loss of our sister. It seems to be one of those ones. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking back to the worst piece of grief I've ever had was the loss of my best friend, like 22 years ago. Yeah. And I haven't slept well for a long, long time. I don't sleep solid through 8 hours. It's much less of it's much less of a issue to me now than it used to be. But 22 years ago, when that happened, I was struggling with my sleep. And the night that this guy died, I slept well. And I slept well because I had a problem that I couldn't solve. So most of the time I was waking up, going to sleep fine, but waking up early and then trying to solve a problem in my head. But this grief thing, it wasn't a problem. I couldn't think my best friend alive again. Do you know what I mean? So I had less on my mind. So I think it's a strange one. Is grief. I don't know why I said all that, but I think it's about permission, really. permission. I'm talking about my own stuff and about trying to, if we can give our position, if we can give ourselves permission to feel not very good, I almost swore again, then if we can give ourselves permission, then we're going to be in a better place to give our kids permission. I think that's where I was going. Does that make?
It does make sense. And I do appreciate you sharing, about the grief and the loss of your friend. But I think in what you just shared, there is at a very core level, there is an acceptance that there is nothing that you were able to do, right? And so you had your body succumb to that and you were able to sleep, right? And I think that there is truth to that in parenting. There is so much we don't know. There are things we will get wrong despite our best intention, despite our best effort. We will get things wrong. Our kids will grow up and they will say, at this age, you said this to me and this is the impact it had. And we may have no recollection of it. But giving ourselves grace and giving ourselves permission to say, I'm trying so hard. I am going to surround myself with people who are going to support me as a parent and make me a better parent, and be real with me if I had a misstep. That's huge. And the same way we expect our kids to apologize when they hit somebody or they take a toy that they weren't supposed to and apologize, as parents, we can do the same thing with our children. Right? We can do that with ourselves. And when we do that, not only are we being more effective communicators, but we're modeling the type of people we want them to grow into. And we want to model for them the types of relationships that they deserve, and that they can be part of.
Some things just occurred to me because I used the model word and then used it back, and I had a bit of a insight on that. They're gonna copy us.
Absolutely.
So it's about being. Sorry, this is might be a bit hippie for you. I don't know. It might be a bit hippie for the listeners, but I've started, so I'll finish. Right, the Gandhi thing, which is be the change that you want to see in the world. So they're going to copy. They're going to copy us. They're going to copy.
Absolutely. We're literally, as human beings, that's what we do. That is a biological process. You can't fight that one.
Yeah.
We're literally designed that way. So think about it, parents, however your family is formed, when you are somebody's parent and you are with them day in and day out, they are observing you. Kids are observing you the same way as parents. We are always observing our children. Like when, I know my son will be like, how did you even know I was doing whatever, he's up to? And I'm like, and I'm, in a different room. I'm like, oh, it's my mom, third eye. And he's like, do you really have a third eye there? Because I used to put my hair in a bun. So I used to tease him that I would hide it there. And you learn these things because of attunement, and your relationship, as it strengthens and you become more attuned together, you're aware of this. And so they are observing, and you're mirroring that for them, and you're experiencing that relationship together. It's how we survive as a species.
So what you're doing, listeners, by listening to this stuff is you're on, like we're all on the learning curve, right? You listeners are on the learning curve. You're actively on the learning curve. And what you're doing here is actually you're learning, hopefully from the guests that I bring onto the show, like I'm learning, and we're all learning to try and be better human beings. Because if we are better human beings, then we will do better. If we know better, this the old thing, if we know better. If we stay curious, then we will learn more.
Mm-hmm.
And if we learn more, we will do better. And if we do better, then we will be better role models for our kids, because it sounds really simple, that, and I hope it's not patronizing.
No, but we overcomplicate it. And
yeah,
we do.
And
for good reason, right? Like, I don't want to minimize that either, right? Like, there are really difficult things that we are interacting and interfacing every single day, right? There are things that are built into our society that makes life hard at times. That's the reality of it. But when you strip that stuff away, it is, in my view, it is what you were saying. And if we can kind of get through that mess, as much as we possibly can, and as often as we can, I genuinely believe we have potential for transformative change, because they don't stay kids forever. They end up being the decision makers. They end up being the policy makers. So if we don't give them that foundation, if we don't take the time to listen to them, to model how to be in healthy relationship, what outcome do we think we're going to get when they're adults?
Yeah.
Why would we be surprised?
So you mentioned the validation word, and I find this fascinating, this validation word, because what I see in adult adoptees, right, is validation, taking people further down the trauma tunnel. Trauma tunnel. So what somebody will say is, X in an adoptee Facebook group, right? Adult adoptee Facebook. They'll say X happened. I'm feeling like Y. This is because I'm adopted. Has anybody else felt that way? And everybody jumps in, and it reinforces the trauma, right? It makes it worse. We're what we focus on gets bigger, right? So it makes it worse. It makes the world darker, and I can see that because I've done it myself.
Sure.
And maybe I do it myself. I continue to do it myself. Maybe I do, but a lot less than I used to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that fine. There's the in parenting, I find this. Well, sorry. Let me take it back. Sorry, excuse me. When I've had therapy or I spoke to a few therapists, and I don't think I found the right one, but anyway, I went with one. The therapist always wanted to kind of take me back, and I've had a lot of coaches take me forward. Sorry, right. Sorry, listeners. If I hadn't muted myself there, if you would have got that right down your ear holes. Coaches tend to build empathy and gently move us on. And so there's the kind of like, I understand how you feel. I've been there myself. Now, kind of what we're going to do about it. Or there's meeting them where they're at, and then there's helping them move forward. And that's what kind of coaching does. What I don't see a lot of online is the moving the other person forward. So, and anybody that challenges or questions gently, and I've done this in groups. I did it once, actually. I've never done it again, because if you challenge, however gently you challenge somebody or question somebody, I hope you can tell I'm quite a soft kind of guy, right? So I'm not some sort of aggressive brute going in there and you shouldn't say this. But as soon as you question an adult, even really gently, like even my friend, you haven't seen quite yourself. the shutters go straight up, right?
Yes.
So how can we, this validation and moving forward and coaching, what does that look like to somebody with your professional experience and a mum? I'm not gonna ask the how do you do it question, but hopefully I've given you enough to give it.
I feel like I understand where you're going with this. I agree with you. I think that is unfortunately that sort of that defense mechanism, or the group think of like, oh yes, that's exactly what it is, and that's why you feel that way. And not your language, but what I have seen play out is sort of like it becomes this like righteous indignation of like, well, I'm going to stay in this and you can't get me out of it, and you have no right to try. And I think for some people that serves a purpose. I may not understand what that purpose is, but it is serving them in some way. And then until they feel or they want something different, I have found it's very hard to move people out of those spaces. What I have seen, particularly with children and their families, is that it's not just about the empathy building and the validation, but it's also really looking at resiliency and helping to remind somebody when they're in that dark space, as you described, right? How they've moved through things before and how they actually have an intrinsic strength that they would be able to draw upon to support them in this moment. And reminding them that they have a support network to move through that. And I really feel like that, at least in my experience, in moments where I have struggled, or in moments where I've seen even my son struggle, that's what's helped to shift him. It's never been yes, it's really difficult to be bullied, or it's really difficult when people comment on some aspect of yourself that is unchangeable. And if we just sit in that, nothing about that's going to change. It's going to feel hard. It's going to feel gross. It's going to make you continuously sad. But if we're able to just, even at an incremental level, sort of open the aperture, I have found that when we tap into that resiliency, that parents, kids, they're able to start to think, wait a minute, maybe there is an alternative here. And for me, and in my work and in my profession, I feel like that's really what we are trying to have people tap into. That what you're sitting in right now, as hard as it is, as painful as it is, it doesn't have to be the only way.
Yeah. Are you a religious person?
I am.
Yeah. So I've heard I'm not, but I hear great wisdom in it, you know. And the thing that popped into my head, which is a great saying for all of us, like when we're going through whatever we're going through, and for our kids as well, is this too shall pass, is it? Is that right?
Yes.
So you mentioned the word intrinsic for resilience, and you also talking about you talked about tapping into that resilience. You actually mentioned tapping into it twice. Actually, I don't know, I'm being very pedantic and analytic at this point. I think I'm trying to stop myself running away, because I'd love to hear your take. Why did you use on resilience, and particularly if you could start by saying, by answering the question, why did you use the word intrinsic?
Because I genuinely believe that it is a capacity that is part of us as humans. I think it is something that, despite any difficulty, circumstance, we have that. in us. And I think about lots of things in very strange ways, I think sometimes, but when I think about us as a species, how would we have been able to go through all of the things that we have through human history if we did not have this deep rooted intrinsic ability to move forward? So I just think it's part of all of us. And I think we have, dare I say it,
Yeah,
okay,
I
I'll
don't
say
know.
it. I feel like we have an obligation to each other to draw that out of each other and remind each other of that.
Okay.
As easy as it is to like cut someone down and to like move down, that road, I try to imagine a world, and I try to create a world with my friends and family where we're trying to build people up. And so for me, it's how do I help someone tap into that? Because there is going to be a time where I'm going to need someone to help me tap into that because I might be at a really low point.
Yeah. So when you say intrinsic, would you also say it's innate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. And I would say that I think that sort of like I was talking about before, where it's like all the stuff, all the mess that kind of gets in the way. I think that's what can cloud it for us to really tap into it, or to genuinely believe I don't have any capacity to move through this. I don't have this ability. Where I would argue we do. We all have it. And I think that we need community to help us recognize that. I think I think at some level, that's why people go to therapy. I think it's why at some level people go to what I've heard, and I don't know who the term's attributed to, but I've heard it my entire career, Indigenous providers, whether that's, going to the barber shop or going to the salon, the people that you start spilling all your stuff to that you don't even realize, right? But they know all your things. We seek out each other to help us in moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm laughing because my mentor for many years used to be a hairdresser, and she was one of those Indigenous providers.
Yeah.
And the other girls in the salon thought that couldn't understand why all the customers wanted to go to her, because they felt that she wasn't as good at cutting hair, right? But
Yep.
they went for the chat, not the haircut. They
right.
went and I spoke to my wife. Used to have a personal trainer. She doesn't anymore because it was quite expensive. So she goes to like a group workout thing now.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him years ago, I said to him, Charlie, he's a nice guy. So, Charlie, so why do people come to you? And he said, well, because they don't feel good about themselves. So, that's another kind of way that people see this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Indigenous provider. So they don't feel good about themselves. They don't feel good about the body. And then they think that changing the body is going to make them feel better. So do you think that the idea that resilience is intrinsic, to use your word, do you think that is the common perception? Do you think that's the way that most people see resilience, or do you think you're in a minority or majority thinking about it?
Oh goodness, what a question, Simon. I mean, I feel like people in my industry were very much in the camp of like, yes, resiliency is something that everyone can tap into. It's there. We build that capacity because it's already there for someone. It's not like, oh, I've come to some great place and now I'm handing that off to you, right? It's no, you have it. I'm just going to help reflect that to you. I would also say that I think that there are a lot of people who very much and have for hundreds of years think that the work of the industry that I'm in, the helping profession, that it's hogwash, and it's like, no, that's ridiculous. It's the type of thing where you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you're fine. And And that's the measure that they use. I think it's about mindset, and I think it's what you choose to be oriented to. And like I said before, I really choose to be oriented to a world where we have this capacity and we can build it in each other. And I think that because there is, at least what I'm seeing in my lifetime, there is a greater willingness, I should say, to talk about mental health. I want to believe that there are more people who are believing this. And I would certainly say that young people very much are in the camp of, yes, resiliency is a thing I can overcome. I will bring people up with me, because they are watching what's happening in the world, and they are actively saying, no, I don't want that for myself. Yeah. I think that's powerful. I think
very powerful.
I think about, in my life, that wasn't something necessarily that I even felt was modeled in the way that I now see for my son.
Yeah.
So
I'm with you that resilience is intrinsic. It's innate. We are born to bounce back, and that's what we see kids falling over, getting back when they're learning to walk, and they get back up, and then it's the kid, it's the parents. I think that we learn fragility. If resilience, I don't know, what would you say was the opposite of resilience?
That's a good question. I think initially, like, the first word that came to me was pain, but I don't think that's quite right. It's like pain adjacent. I'd have to think on that a little bit more, but it's somewhere in that realm, because pain happens, right? Like, you get harmed, you're going to feel it. So I'm not talking about the physical manifestation of it, but sort of that sort of like deep guttural pain, emotional pain that we feel. I think that's, and I don't have a great word for it.
No.
But that is, I think, is the opposite.
So the word I came up with for this was fragility. I think we learn fragility. We pick up on, we pick up from the world around us that we don't think we're going to be able to cope.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to have coping mechanisms and all this
right.
sort of thing. But I'm totally with you on resilience being intrinsic. But there's a whole industry out there telling us that it's not. It's like going to the gym, and and the reason I'm saying this is so that people, the listeners, are aware of it, and because we are conditioned, I believe we're conditioned to believe that resilience is something that needs to be strengthened. It's a skill rather than an innate, an intrinsic capacity. Because going to the gym to get buff or whatever, to get the six pack, whatever, takes a long time, right? Yeah. But seeing something new, if resilience is seen rather than strengthened, then that happens a whole lot quicker.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's something that we have already, like an insight, ka-ching. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm laboring the point. I'm laboring the point, hopefully, so that listeners pick up on, right. So I've got resilience already. That's what Simon and Imani are saying. I've got resilience already. I just haven't seen it. Oh, what? My kids got resilience already. They can bounce back. They just haven't seen it. Then it becomes a game of finding it, not strengthening it. And finding it happens, like, I've lost my keys. Oh, I've lost my keys. Oh, I found them.
Right.
It's like happens a whole lot quicker. But the resilience industry says, we know how you parents, you're overwhelmed. You're feeling that you're not going to be able to cope. we can help you develop your resilience. I felt exactly how you felt. And if you come on my course, I'll tell you the 7 steps to becoming a more resilient parent.
Yeah. It's all packaged.
Sorry?
It's like all packaged.
It's
right?
all packaged from me.
Yeah.
And it's only going to cost you $9.99 or $4.99, or it's a 12-month course on resilience, and it's going to cost you £12,000. Somebody once said to me, you're not, and it really got me. You can't do what you want to do, Simon, but if you work with me for a year, or as long as it takes, pay me £12,000, I'll help you get into that way. And I thought, it really took me back. It really took me back. But he was a slippery salesperson, and I spoke to my mentor lady a couple of days afterwards, when I'd seen what he was doing to me. We've got all these people trying to sell us stuff, and it scares the bejesus out of me. So anyway, a bit of a sign. So it's a seeing thing. It's seeing. It is intrinsic. It is built in. It is like, the people talk about this like it's with metaphors, right? So it's the sun, the resilience is there. The sun is always shining, but sometimes it's nighttime, so we can't see it. Right. Sometimes it's daytime and a cloud goes in front of it. So if the resilience, if the resilience is the sun, I don't know. Have you got a better way of? You must have a better
I think that's a solid metaphor for it. And I would just add to what you were saying though about like the gentleman who was slippery. I think about that in context of parenting. I think about that in context of even in my profession. If we convince people, or if as parents we convince ourselves, and we are then modeling and teaching our children that the only way that things are going to be better for them is if it is this external, solely external. I'm not saying that you don't need and you wouldn't benefit from help from people outside of your family, right? But if they think that you can only get it in this, snappy, glossy, packaged thing, how will they ever find the capacity to be at their best? How will they ever thrive? And to me, that's such a dangerous message to send to any person, let alone a person whose mind is still forming and is incredibly impressionable and looking to all of their family. They're looking to the outside world for guideposts of where they're going to go.
Yeah. It's an inside job.
And it's something that requires active, chronic effort. It's not like, oh, today I'm actualized, I'm all good, and we're done. Like it just.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about this. I don't know, it was on a podcast or just a conversation, because once and done in this stuff, once you've learned to ride a bike, it's pretty. You can't unlearn it. You might fall off, but it's pretty much once and done, isn't it? So I'm thinking about my own stuff and learning to drive. And crashing cars, right? Okay, I've crashed a few cars, so in that sense, but it's kind of once and done. But this stuff, this kind of seeing our own resilience, breakthrough insights, and breakthrough feeling fine about it, is not a once and done. It's not a once and done thing. It's the continual learning journey. And I listen to podcasts about this stuff like an hour and a half a day, when I'm walking the dog, when I'm driving the car, because it is never, it's never once and done. Once we know that 2 + 2 is 4, we know, we don't forget. This stuff about we do forget our resilience.
We do. And it's very easy to. Think about it. You can, and certainly for the parents that are out there, I'm sure they can relate to this, where they're having an interaction with their child, and all of a sudden, maybe they get like a little tightness in their chest, or they're realizing they're very upset about something because maybe their child has said something that has stirred up maybe some unresolved stuff that they thought they took care of, and now they're having to re-examine that again. That's a moment where you're having to remind yourself how to rebuild that capacity, because it's not that you're going to forget that stuff necessarily. It's not that it's not going to have an impact on you, but it's being able to connect to and to remember, I have the capacity to move through this feeling. I have the capacity to, instead of just initially reacting to it, and maybe it's with anger or with sadness, whatever that is, I can tap into it. I can try to understand it from this place and time, and all of the knowledge I have. I remember many years ago, I met with a therapist, because therapists, we meet with therapists too. And a therapist was reminding me that just because you feel like you're in a similar place doesn't mean that you're starting right back at square one. And it took me a long time to really understand that. And yeah, it might feel familiar, but you're also a different person in time and space. You've had other experiences, you've had growth points, you have skills, you have capacity to do these things. And it's okay to have those moments where you need to be reminded. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're starting from square one. It just means you're getting actually a little bit further on your journey. And that's a good stretch.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time. I'm looking back at what we said we were going to do, and it seems that we've had a more profound conversation rather than the how-tos, which is good, because I like profound, and I also think it's good for, well, yeah, I was going to say it's good for the listeners. That sounds really patronizing, but I believe the change happens at when we have those insights, when we have, the whole purpose of the show is to catalyze insights. So I think we've done we've created a better podcast than I thought we were going to do.
Wonderful. High five and gold stars for us then.
Yeah. Do you? I'm hoping. Yeah. Well, that's great, Simon. I thought it was terrible. How was it for you?
No, I think, honestly, at the heart of it, what we're talking about is communication. We're talking about modeling. And these are the things that as parents, we want so that our kids are going to be successful. This is what we want for ourselves. And that's what we talked about in lots of different ways. Because there isn't going to just be one way. It can't be. No, that's okay too.
That's okay too. Is there anything else you'd like to finish with?
I would say that for any person that's listening today, any parent who is maybe realizing that this conversation is resonating, to them in a way that maybe they weren't prepared for, or a way that maybe surprised them, I would hope that they will, really hear the message that we were sharing today, and give themselves grace, and if they can, to take just a quiet moment to really think about what they're doing that's really making a benefit and a positive impact for their child, and give themselves the permission to feel that. Because I think that's really just so important. It's so empowering, and I hope your audience knows that they are seen and that they are cared for, because raising kids is hard. It is, and we're all trying so hard to make it work.
Well, thank you, Imani, and thank you, listeners. We will speak to you again very soon. As usual, in the show notes, listeners, there's links to Imani on social and to the the home, so you can check out what they're doing. And we will speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot for
Wonderful.
listening.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Bye.